Hi, in this video we're going to be looking at using the Project 3D node in Nuke to project elements onto geometry. And to do that, it's simply just a node called Project 3D. And if I pull this out, Project 3D, it's a shader, and it's located under the 3D menu under shaders, and you'll find it over here called Project 3D. So essentially this node is what its name is. It's going to take an element and project it onto a geometry so that you could have the element move in your 3D scene and behave as you'd expect onto the geometry. So the plan for this video is to use a stock element. So it's this element right here that we're going to be using, and if I press play on it, it's this smoke element. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this element to project with our helicopter render that we just did. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this element as ambient smoke on the other side of this helicopter to mimic smoke from it firing its gunners. In one of the upcoming lectures, we're going to be creating tracers for this helicopter. So this element is going to be it's going to be an element to help kind of sell our tracer events. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this element with the Project 3D node. So to begin with, what I did is I rendered out our helicopter that we generated in our last lecture with the 3D lights. And what I'm going to do is use a, one thing to mention about that too, by the way, is I put a transform geo on our helicopter geometry just so it could shift over a little bit, because previously without this element on there, I put a 1 pixel reposition. Let me go back to this video. I put a 1.5 pixel offset on this helicopter geometry so it shifts over a little bit, because originally it was a little bit too far in front of his face and obscuring things. So to make it a little bit more interesting and create a little bit better composition, I just shifted this helicopter over by 1.5 pixels. So I would recommend doing that to your helicopter as well too, but if you haven't, that's totally fine. I just thought it was a little bit better composition. So anyways, I applied that and I rendered out our helicopter element, and you could see that 1.5 pixel offset. So what we're going to do now is use this element, and we're going to project this element onto a card that'll be located with this helicopter. So to begin with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull in a axis that I wrote out that is a locator based on the location of the gunner on this helicopter. So to do that, let's grab an axis node. And let me pop this out. Under the File tab, similar to our camera node, we could read axis and locators from File. So if I go to our 3D scene, if I go to Read from File and browse to our locator, so it's this axis called Gunner Locator, and we're going to say Open and say yes, we want to read this from File. You could see this axis. Now we're reading data from File here. So if we look in 3D here, this axis 6 is going to have animation to it. So we're going to use this axis to place our card in 3D space. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to rename this Gunner Locator. So that'll help keep things a little bit clear. So we could close that. We don't need that anymore. And what I'm going to do is create a scene node. And we'll plug in the gunner to the scene node, and we'll plug our render camera in that as well, just so it's a little bit more clean. So we plugged our render camera in, and now if we look at render camera and I lock this camera, you could see this gunner locator is where our helicopter was in 3D space. So that's moving with our helicopter, which is great. So what we're going to do now is create a card. geometry. So we could go 3D geometry and we'll go geometry card. And now we've got this card. And if you look at this card, it sits in the origin because that's where the default location will be when you create a new geometry. But if you use our gunner locator as our location point for the card, then this card will move over to match that position. So what we'll do is we'll grab a transform geo and we'll go transform geo and we'll plug our card in to the input for the card. And then the axis node will plug in from this transform geo into this gun locator. And now you could see our card is in the location of that axis node. And if we move to another frame, that card is moving with our locator. So that's exactly what we wanted. So that's a very handy use of the transform geo node. So I'll put that in our stream right there. And we could always scale up our card a little bit just to make sure we have enough scale on this card. So maybe we'll just set it to 5 for now. And the other thing we could do too is if I move this locator over, we could have this transform geo look at our camera. So this geometry will always be facing our camera if it's being pointed to look at the camera there. So now that that's set up, we could start placing our smoke element onto that card using the project 3D node. So what I'm going to do right now is, if we view this element, it's shooting up. So what we want to do is we want to rotate this element so that it's coming this direction. So what I'll do is, first things first, I'll put a reformat on this element. And then I'm going to put a transform node down. And I'm going to, by holding command on my keyboard, I'm going to move the center point down here so we could rotate from the bottom here. And we'll rotate this 90 degrees. And I'm just going to shift this up too, like so. So now this element is going to be shooting. So now that that's set, I'm going to put a crop node down just to cut out this extra bit right here. And what we could do to get rid of this sharp bounding box from our element is, if I pop this out, under the crop node there is a softness option, and what we could do is set this softness to 200, and it'll help bleed in and soften so we don't have this hard edge. So again, if it's at 0, we have the hard edge. So if we increase this, we get a little bit more fall off on this. And then what I could do is start to pull this in a little bit at the bottom, and then we'll definitely pull this in like so. So we could see the edge of this element, and we'll do the same thing where we'll bring this part in so we don't have that hard edge over there. And then now let's do a Luma key to create an alpha channel for this. So we'll do Luma key, we'll do a keyer. And now if we look at our alpha channel, we have the smoke element as our alpha. So now that we have that, we'll put another transform down so we could scale this down. So again, I'm going to hold the center point, command down, and move the center point. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this frame as our lineup. So what we'll do is we're just to test out where and how big we want this element to be. Let me just do a quick comp of this on top. So this way we could line this element up on frame 1087. So what I'm going to do is, we know we definitely need to scale this down. So we'll go to scale of like 0.125. And I'm going to just reposition this somewhere like that. And looking at that, that might be a little too big again. So we'll just scale this down a little bit more to maybe just, 0.1. So great. Now we have this smoke element sitting over here. So now that we've got this lined up on frame 1087, we could use our card and project this element on there. So what we'll do is grab our project 3D node. Let me just move these up a little bit. We'll plug in our element into the first input. And you could see that we have a camera input, right? So what we'll do is we'll plug the project 3D into our geometry. And what we're going to do is grab a frame hold and we'll plug this to our camera. So what this is going to do, if I set this to, let me pop it out and set this to frame 1087. So what this is going to do is it's going to hold our render camera on frame 1087. So this becomes a projection camera. So what it's going to do is it's going to project using this frame, and then we're going to use the rest of the render camera to render out the rest of the motion from this. So if I plug this frame hold into the camera input of our project 3D, and we look in 3D space with our transform geo, and now if I go to another frame, you could see our card is moving and our element is being projected onto this card. And its initial lineup frame was 1087. So that's what it's doing. So if I again go back to 1087, another way of looking at this is if I duplicate our render camera, and let me pop this out, and if I uncheck this read from file and right click and say no animation, and right click here again on the rotation and say no animation, what this is doing now is it just becomes a frame hold. So that's what this frame hold over here is doing for us. So it saves us the step of having to create what we would call, let me rename this. If we call this projection cam. So that's what this frame hold is doing. It's saving us this step of having to duplicate our camera, delete animations on it, and having that become our projection camera. So it's a handy way of just using a frame hold and bypassing this step. So hopefully that makes sense. I could clear that up a little bit more if needed. But now that we've got this element projected on this geometry, we could put a scanline render node down and see what this looks like with our chopper. So let's put scanline render down. We'll go object, and we'll plug our camera in to the camera input. And now if we look in 2D scene, we've got this smoke element projected on this card. And now let's put this element underneath our helicopter and see what we get. So I'll do a merge. And we'll just say under for the operation, and I'll put this, plug the merge node to our helicopter. So we have our helicopter, and there's our smoke element underneath it. So now if we go to another frame, you could see as it's calculating right now, this smoke element is moving with our helicopter. And what I could do is just do a quick little flip book. I'll put an in and out point, and I'll maybe set an out point over here. And if we view this, you could see we've got this smoke element tracking and moving with our camera. So that's the really handy thing with Project 3D, is you could use it to put other elements in 3D space and project it on geometry. We didn't necessarily have to project this on a card, but a card is a simple, quick geometry with not much density or anything to it. So using a card to project is always a great way to just project something on a geometry. So in another example, we'll look at using the Project 3D with our Zilla geometry. But for right now, this card element is going to do just fine. And you could see it's lined up right there. And if we view this over our 3D scene and flipbook this real quick, we could see that smoke element coming from our camera, from our helicopter. And obviously we could grade and balance this smoke element just so it's a little bit more subtle and not so in our face. But for the sake of this exercise, you could see what this element is doing projected on a card. In another video, we'll look at it with another geometry.